I'm dangerous enough to read code, but don't ask me to go code in Python, right? So what was interesting is I knew I couldn't build without, a CTO, a tech co-founder, right? And unfortunately, I lost two since July of last year. And so it's been always very disruptive, right? More than a few weeks ago, I was almost crying of, I did an experiment. I was like, hey, let me go try to rebuild the UI for Boxsy in Lovable. I was like, let's do it. And like in 20 minutes, I had what? 50, 60% of the product built. And I was like crying. Not literally, but in my head, I was crying thinking, how much time and money have I spent to build this UI where I could have waited another 6 months and I would have had this tool and, we would have had an MVP in 6 weeks.
You're listening to Forum Founders. We tell stories of immigrant and first-gen entrepreneurs, investors, operators, and ecosystem builders. And on the show, you hear incredible stories that often go untold.
Elisabeth Bykoff is the founder and CEO of Boxsy. Boxsy is the first AI-powered end-to-end SaaS platform that propels startups towards scalable and profitable growth. Elisabeth has a rich background, 2 master's degrees, consulting for 10 years, going to startups, and she's a writer and producer and now a founder. I'm excited to have you on the show. Welcome to Forum Founder, Elisabeth.
Hey, thanks for having me, Andy.
I would love to hear about your starting journey. Where'd you grow up? What brought you to the US? And you're celebrating 20 years in the US. Is that right?
Yeah, a bit over 20 years. It's going to be 21 years in September, actually.
Amazing. And we'll cover the book, which is basically telling stories about that. But tell me, where'd you grow up?
Yeah, born and raised in France. Don't hold that against me. And born in Nice, actually southeast of France. And my parents moved to Paris when I was 4.5. So mainly grew up in Paris and the suburbs. I can claim that. And then went to engineering school actually in Toulouse in the southwest of France. And I was doing aerospace engineering. So that's where the big headquarters for Airbus is. So no surprise there to go to school there. And then when I decided to move to the US in 2004, getting ready as an exchange visiting grad student, I actually picked Seattle because I was like, Airbus Toulouse, Boeing commercial Seattle. So let's go to Seattle and push my school to restart the exchange program with the University of Washington in Seattle.
Yeah. And from there, did you go into aerospace engineering or what does that career path look like?
Yeah, actually, it's funny. I landed and I really wanted to stay in aerospace engineering, right? I was like, hey, Boeing, please hire me. I'm graduating from my master at the end of the school year. And they were like, absolutely not. Why don't you just go home and work for Airbus? We're not going to sponsor a visa or anything like that. So very quickly, I had to think through how do I stay in the US? And I decided to reroute to business. I thought, hey, you know what? This very naive French girl was like, hey, let's apply to get an MBA and see what happens. And as you imagine, we get the Ivy League. Oh, I looked at Harvard and Berkeley and Stanford. And very frankly, I couldn't afford it. My parents could not help me out or anything like that. So I only applied to one program, which was University of Washington. And I thought I stay or I go home. I get in or I go home. And I ended up getting in. And so never looked back, did my 2 years there and then got into consulting. That's really what happened.
And consulting, you were there for 10 years. One of the stories that I heard from your other podcast was that moment where what you said about this is I'm either getting into UW or not is actually a pretty common story for a lot of immigrants too. It's either that one path or not. And it almost feels like that 10 years of consulting was also that where you were thinking 10 years is a long time, but what other paths could you take? Yeah, in that way, you were doing consulting for a while, but how did you get dragged into startup world from there?
Yeah, I'll come back to one of your thing around the 10 years at PwC. Two things, to be honest, was not as much as like I stay or I go with that experience, but I knew I was an F1 student when I first got the job. And so they were sponsoring me for an H1B. And so I knew that if I wanted a green card, I had to stay at least 5 years at PwC, and they would I would have to make manager and then they would sponsor me. And, that first moment to sign the employment offer, the job offer took me a few seconds of saying, oh, I'm committing for at least 5 years, right? To at least be able to stay as
Right.
not an H-1B, but like a green card. And then to be frank, I thought I came with my French mentality of at a time it was like one job for maybe your entire career. So I thought I was going to stay, be a partner and never get out, right? So that was really the two reasons why I stayed 10 years. And I did enjoy it. It was a great experience. I ended up building a business within the safety of a very big firm. And
Mhm.
that's actually the transition to your next question, which is I had such a fun time building the US Salesforce practice for them, entrepreneur. And when it was time to sign my life away and make partner in 2017
Right.
and beyond, I
Mm.
actually quit. I said, you know what, it's not the right thing for me or the right time. There was things going on with the firm and I just felt like the carrot was moving and I was exhausted. I was traveling every week for 5 years. And so I quit with no job. Nobody believed it. And I thought I was in the Bay Area and I thought, hey, I think it's time for me to go and check out this pre-IPO world, right? The startup world. And I love building. Let's go build. Let's go help build something. And I didn't go very far. When I first joined that world, I went to a very late stage company called Aptus, which is now Conga, the big ISV at the time for
Mhm.
Salesforce. That was my world. I come from the Salesforce world. And so that was my first array into, oh my, this is not a services company. This is a product company. What does it mean? And it was a great transition for me to get into that world.
What's one thing that you learned the most about transitioning from a services to product company?
Services are relevant for product companies. It's a devil you need, especially when you sell software and SaaS solutions that are complex. That is not
Hmm.
just plug and play, which I think we'll see a lot of changes with AI now on those things. But at the time, you're coming from selling people and selling expertise to pretty much an entire company telling you, yeah, this doesn't count anymore. This is just a byproduct of our main core business.
Absolutely.
And so that's why I'm saying this transition from I didn't go from consulting to Series A. I think that would have been a huge transition, like a bit of a shock. And so that was really good for me to be able to take what I had learned and then understand that concept of AR is more important than services revenue and this is how you sell a product. And so that was a great way for me to learn that. And that was the biggest learning, to be honest, as I transitioned.
And then from there, what was next? Did you jump into starting a company?
No, I had an opportunity. I moved to New York for personal reason and I had a chance to join a Series A company. And I
Hmm.
thought if I don't do it now, I'll never do it, going from 290 million in revenue to barely a million in AR. And so I made my way to earlier stage, believe it or not, until pre-product, pre-revenue last year. I was fractional CEO for a company. And so that's really how I got to eventually be an angel investor, be a coach and advisor for startups and still doing operating, helping to operate a business. And then it was time, I guess. I was like, hey, I'm missing one hat. Maybe I should. Do I want to do it? Should I do it? And then kicked myself in the butt and say, okay, let's do it. Let's try it.
Yeah, when I said you had a really rich background, you have literally done so many different roles in so many different sizes of companies, industries, and all that stuff. Do you think that is also a little bit of how you grew up, being risk taking and like moving to different places? Like maybe that has a little bit of a connection there.
Yeah, I think my parents are one of my parent is French, the other is not really French. He's born in Eastern Europe, what's now Eastern Europe. A lot of challenges through my historical family story, if I can say that, right? Where people had to move or lost everything, had to reinvent themselves, find new jobs. And so I was really raised, I would say maybe not the non-typical French background. Can do everything, go for it, chase your dreams and take the risk, but I had maybe one side telling me to take a risk versus not as much on the other side. And so for me, that's, I think, like I said, when I started my career, I didn't think I was going to take any risk. I was like, oh, let's be a partner and stay at PwC. And then you eventually realize, okay, I'm ready to go do something else. What do I do now? And I think my first changes, right? My first switches were more calculated risks than anything else. And then it become less and less calculated. Obviously, becoming a founder, you calculate, but the calculations can be really wrong. You don't know where you're going to end up. You're working
There's
towards
millions
one
path
outcome,
going
right?
right in
But
front of
you
you.
don't
Yeah.
know. And so I think I was able to learn from those calculated risks and then eventually be like, okay, let's take an uncalculated one and see what happens.
Let's talk about Boxy. How'd you first think about Boxy and what you wanted to build there?
Yeah, at the end of 22, I had just come out with ChatGPT. It was finally
Mhm.
available for all of us. And I had helped so many startups and getting the same questions over and over again on how do you build a B2B sales process in Salesforce or anywhere else? Or how do you build a customer success a customer success organization? And I thought, if any more startups ask me to do that, I'm shooting myself in the head. There has to be a better way. There's
Yeah.
this wealth of best practice out there, this wealth of knowledge from advisors and coaches and all that, and how do we bring that to the founders fingertips? So
Mhm.
Boxsy really started as ops in a box for startup, or startup for dummies. One of my
Mhm.
fellow founders at the time that I was interviewing was like, oh, that's what you're trying to do, like fellow startup for dummies. And I thought, oh yeah, I guess that's what, yeah, like how do we help you build a business? And I took my time, to be frank. It's not like I jumped in 22 and said, okay, let's incorporate, let's do this. I really played with the idea in 2023 of go doing my user validation. Is there something there? What's really the pain points? And then eventually towards 23, okay, now it's time. Let's go build some IP under a name and a domain and not just under me. And then through there, really spend more time with design partners and with AI evolving, to be honest. It came from guiding, building a platform that could guide founders to, hey, how much can we set up, automate, and manage for founders with AI agents now, more recently, and MCP and A2A and all that. And so that's what we really are set out to do. On the startup side is really helping founders on operationally build a stronger business as much as
Mhm.
we can. And then along the way, we discovered that there was an entire interest from investors and ecosystem partners. So when you think about professional association incubators, accelerators that manage cohort of companies, I really liked that vision of being able to build a stronger relationship with those cohort companies, right? And so we ended up currently not completely pivoting, but like how do we merge that and then really build this virtuous circle between the two sides to build a better venture ecosystem, to be honest.
Just to repeat what you said, initially the product was for companies, founders, startups to be like, once I have incorporated startups, I might have the early tractions or early signs of this being a business, but what comes next was the question you would hear as a fractional COO. So the ops in the box came into play. But from there, you were hearing from different players in the ecosystem being like, actually, I would love to see what's happening within the company. And that's tangentially like where you are today. Is that right?
Correct. That's where we're seeing actually more traction than expected. We're getting pulled in that side of the house with pilots with that have organization that have from 10 to 35 to 400 entrepreneurs that they want to eventually, if the pilots work
Wow.
out, put on the platform and really help them and build a better relationships with them. Yeah.
And I imagine, especially with these, let's say VCs or organizations that work with so many different companies and different organizations, this must be like mission critical for them. Like, how have they used it in the past? Or what have they been using since before working with you, potentially?
A lot of them are on tools like spreadsheets or Airtable or Asana, you name it. Some of
Yeah,
them
that's crazy.
or fragmented, HubSpot for something,
Yeah.
Asana for something else, spreadsheet for other things. There are tools out there, but a lot of tools are very dedicated or siloed, right? So Affinity CRM for specifically deal flow, and then you have due diligence tools, and then you have portfolio management. And so what and they're expensive, by the way. We got some feedback around
Hmm.
that, or they don't fulfill exactly what the VCs or the investor type is looking for. And so we've been trying to really get that input and build with them and be like, okay, what if we were helping you build and nurture the pipeline? So even pre-investment, pre getting into a program, right? To all the way to post and give you the real time signals of maybe re-engaging so you don't miss a deal, you don't miss an opportunity to invest, or you don't miss an opportunity to bring a startup into the program. And that's something that we've heard a lot around not being able to do that and sometimes missing on deals and pre-investment,
Hmm.
post-investment, not always having the transparency to know what's going on, waiting for the updates and then not being able to help on a timely manner. Because at the end of the day,
Hmm.
what we're trying to do on that side is really de-risk their investments, right? So if you can see upfront how the company is really doing and whether they match your funding criteria, you're more likely to fund that company. And then if you can keep seeing what's going on, you're more likely to then intervene before they go under, let's say, and therefore the probability for the startups to be more successful goes up, and of course the returns for investors goes up too, right? So we're really trying to, it's really not just about one side or the next, is how do you really make sure both sides get what they need to just at the end of the day raise everybody up, right?
Yeah. So from the VC side, it makes a lot of sense. You, especially if you have 300, 400 in your portfolio and all this information is coming from all of the different places. What's the desire for from the founders side to work with a platform like Boxy?
Yeah. So in terms of the agentic CEO, the first piece we're focusing on is fundraising readiness, right? And so this is where we are, you could say, let's try to apply to every possible function of the business. And it's not it's hard, right? We will get there eventually, but we had to start somewhere. And we heard from founders that the three critical operational areas were fundraising, revenue ops, and hiring talent. Early, I'm talking
Hmm.
early stage, and I'm not talking Series B and beyond, but and we decided to go with fundraising because we were bringing metrics already for startup founders into one control center. So think about it, single pane of glass on what's going on in your business.
Hmm.
And that's what, no matter what, you need to know as a founder, so you don't run out of cash and you know what's going on. But two, you most likely as you're talking to investor, you have to be able to share those anywhere with investors, right?
Yeah.
As part of due diligence or even post investment. So because we started with that, we're able to really do two things. One, instead of having fragmented tools again for fundraising, can we have fundraising pipeline and data room and investor update plus those metrics into one spot so you're fundraising ready? And we're guiding you still. We have, I call it fundraising ops readiness checklist of, hey, at this stage, these are the things you should have in place or think about putting in place. So you can also show to your investors, I'm operationally sound, which is very important, believe it or not, from a value creation. And then from there, what we're trying to do is say, if we're trying to become the go-to standard from fundraising. So it's almost like if you want to fundraise from this VC or be part of Techstar, let's say I'm making something up, right? You got
Yeah.
to join Boxsy because this is how they're running their process, and this is it. This is the information they're going to ask you to share in order for you to come and get fundraised, right? It's
Hmm.
accelerating fundraising and giving you almost a go-to, right? If you want to be considered for fundraising opportunities, you got to be on. Do you know what I mean? You got to be on
Yeah.
Boxy, but that also means that we have to force and change, not force, but change the mindset from investors to say, for them to do that, you have to give to get. So it's
Yeah.
like you have to be a bit more specific on what are your fundraising criteria, right? Because we get a lot of feedback, we get passed, we get told, hey, not enough traction. Then what traction are you looking for? And so we're
Yeah.
working with investors and ecosystem partners to say, if you want them to come on, then you have to give something. And that's the transparency we're trying to build on both sides, is that if you want startups to be more transparent, you also have to be more transparent.
Yeah.
And that's how it works. And longer term, what we're trying to do is to say, startup A may have been invited to Boxy from investor A, but you know what? They fit into the fundraising criteria of investor B. Let's start making the connection, right? And so that's really
Yeah.
the goal at the end of the day with critical mass and having
Yeah.
as many startups as we can, investors or ecosystem partners, is to then make that matchmaking real, where it's not on just pre-seed geo, the typical category industry, but we're like, no, wait, you are in the AR band for these investors, or you are in number of users, like whatever it is, right? Depending on your thing, that would be the idea, to start really doing proactive recommendations in terms of the fundraising and capital, right? And securing capital.
The startup fundraising metrics is also like standardization. It's almost like gap standard principles on accounting, almost like that. And then with the transparency, it looks like Boxy is initially like a single player experience between the companies, but then it almost becomes a matchmaking marketplace as it goes
Essentially.
by. And then you start building all these things. That's super cool. Let's talk about Boxy and your challenges, especially this is there are a couple things that I've heard that are very unique to you and Boxy as a first-time founder, if I can say that.
Yeah, yeah.
2022 to 2023 was the discovery. Super patient, but also very strategic in saying, okay, we will move this way, compared to me, where I was like, 2022, around the same time, I was like, head in, everything, go all in on the startup. So completely different. And I would also like totally do it differently next time. But what are some of the challenges that you've experienced so far?
I think they're not uncommon to most founders. I'm sure Andy,
Yeah.
you can relate. So I'm not a tech founder. I'm dangerous enough to read code, but don't ask me to go code in Python, right? What was interesting is I knew I couldn't build without a CTO, a tech co-founder, right? And unfortunately, I lost two. since July of last year. And so it's been always very disruptive, right? In general, to find that tech leader, that partner, really. It doesn't matter what title you have, right? But that partner to be like, hey, let's go build this quickly. Let's go iterate and learn and all that. And so that has been a challenge. And what's been a challenge on top of all that is the tech's going so fast. A few weeks ago, more than a few weeks ago, I was almost crying of trying to, I did an experiment. I was like, hey, let me go try to rebuild the UI for Boxsy in Lovable. I was like, let's do that. And I made in 20 minutes, I had what? 50-60% of the product built, and I was like crying, not literally, but in my head I was crying thinking, how much time and money have I spent to build this UI where I could have waited another 6 months and I would have had this tool and we would have had an MVP in 6 weeks. So that's been one thing. And then the second, the CTO not being a tech founder, and then the tech is going so fast that you want to build fast, but I'm worried that the tech is, I select a tool or you select a third party that a framework you're going to build on, and then 2 weeks later it's no, too bad, you should have gone the other way, and then you have to rebuild out of that corner. So that's been a bit top of mind for me in general. Two has been traction. How do you find PMF? I'm not gonna lie, right? We're not catering to enterprise, where we're catering into the small medium business, even VCs, except if you're talking A16Z, and some of the big ones are small and medium businesses when you think about it, right? It's very tight team. So it's a bit of a different play. Some people think it's going to be easier because your sales cycles are shorter, but at the same time, you need to do a bit more volume because your deal size are smaller. So that's been interesting. And then, like I said, we're in the middle of go-to-market pivot because we're getting pulled way more on the investor and ecosystem partner side. So that's been interesting. And then everybody else, fundraising, right? I'm not completely immune to this lovely process that takes so much time and effort and sometimes just doesn't work. And so that's been top of mind. And as the market's been difficult again, it's back at being difficult. I think it had opened up a bit more mid last year, and now we're back closed. And so again, if you're not a multiple exited founder, or you're not doing something very deep tech AI. And I have to admit, we're not solving a sexy problem. It's not like it's an important problem and we have a pain point, but it's not like the sexiest thing. So it's been interesting to have those investor conversations.
Fundraising, especially in the last 2 years or so. Like, I have friends who are going through it for 18 plus months, and it is crazy out there. So that's actually a perfect segue to what I would love to learn from you on, like, you're building for startups, early stage startups and their partners, ecosystem partners, whether it's VCs. Where do you think it goes in the next 5 years? Especially within the context of, there's a lot of different articles about VC landscaping potentially changing. What you mentioned earlier, you can do a really nice prototype with Lovable super easily. I think I tweeted something during December where I was like, 10 years ago, I remember I was trying to learn how to code apps, right? Swift and like learning. And it took me 4 weeks to create the stupid alarm clock app. And over the holiday, like last December, I went on Replit and did it before my coffee was cold, like the same app. So a lot of the discussion around that is, okay, where does the money go? How do the VCs find alpha? So I would love to hear from you within the context of what you're building. Where do you think the industry goes?
Yeah. So I'll tell you two things. I think from a startup perspective, I think some of the rules, unsaid rules, I'm going to call them, that we hear to get funded will change. They're already changing, right? So hey, if you're not a tech founder, you don't have a tech co-founder, we're not going to fund you. This is already changing because anybody like me and you can just, or I mean, me at least, can go and just build something on Lovable, at least get proof that it's validate and then move on. You still need a bit of tech support then to scale it, but at least there's this requirement of you have to have a tech co-founder. You will have to add a lot of people to build a product and a company. So that concept of solo entrepreneur. And I think you'll see more and more teams that will stay nimble and small at a really higher ARR that we used to see. It's a bit of the Instagram story. And I think you'll see more and more of that, right? The 12 people that sold at 1.6 bill or whatever it was, right? And so I think you'll see it's going to give two things. You're going to get even more startup being started because everybody's going to be like, okay, now I don't need to be tech. But then it's also mean that it's going to be more difficult to stay alive, because I think we're seeing that already with the tech innovation, which is what is IP now, right? Where is the tech IP, right? We're all using other people's LLMs. We're all using other people's open source framework to build some of our products. So the IP is also going to shift from pure tech IP. Again, I'm not talking deep tech science, but for some of us doing SaaS applications, AI powered SaaS application, where does the IP reside? And I think a lot is going to be now execution and go to market, right? It's like you succeed not just because of the tech, but because you know how to execute and you found your wheel, your go-to-market wheel, that your IP is your customer base pretty much, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's going to be a big difference. And so you're going to see way more startups, but you'll see also way more startup or disappearing and or consolidating. And I think we're starting to see that too, right? Seed to Series A, coming together, having adjacent products and building platforms and suites of product for the same audience, ICP, versus just trying to compete longer and starting to build what they have. And I've seen that just in some of the startups that I coached in the last cohort at Morgan Stanley. We're starting to hear some M&A activity, right? I think on the investor side, and you might have seen some of the LinkedIn post too, is I think because of AI too, investors are changing their teams. They're like, we got to adopt the tech to do better investment. We are going to stay longer in our investments, hold on to those investments. We see that, right? The IPO window is closed pretty much, very slow. And so for them to maintain valuations or grow valuation, that means the company's top and bottom line need to grow, right? There is no other way. And so if you can't raise another round, let's say you're stuck a bit, right? Then you have to hit your targets, your revenue targets and all that. And so therefore, I don't think investors are going to be able to stay, and they don't want to. You're seeing that on LinkedIn on some of the posts and the articles, right? They're changing their structure, RRA, to diversify their investment thesis, not just BVC, but also credit and debt and other things, hedge funds almost. They're changing also how they want to operate. They want to operate the companies more. It's almost like a P playbook when you think about it, right? So it's like, is VC going to look like, hey, we're spray and hope for the best? I think you'll see more hands-on investors, if that makes sense. And I think that's great, to be honest. I'm actually I'm glad, because I always was like, why? You're making 100 bets hoping one's going to hit. Why don't you just spend more time and try to have maybe 3-5 hit and your returns are higher? But that was never the model. Capital was cheap. I think with that, the relationship between the two sides are going to change, right? It's just, you're going to have to be more transparent on both sides for all of us to operate together in a better fashion. And then at the end of the day, towards the same goal, right? It's to be have a successful company to then exit one way or another eventually. So
create that win-win scenario for everyone in that ecosystem.
It puts more skin in the game on both sides, I think, which is a good thing.
Yeah. Are you ready for our last couple questions?
Absolutely.
So at the top, I talked about your newly released book, French Landing. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So this is 20 stories from your 20 years in the US, almost 20 years. Will you please tell maybe the show audience, what is one story that you would like to share? And then rest of the 19, like people can listen to your audiobook, which you narrated yourself, which I'll add on the show notes as well.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, so it's 20 stories, it's more early on, right? Because it's really my first experiences as a French young woman arriving in the US and experiencing each chapter a different topic, right? So religion and race, politics, dating, you name it, right? Food, wine. And one of the story I can share, because it's still been 20 years, and I'm sure some of you will relate, is healthcare, right? I just can't wrap my head around it. It was healthcare and retirement. Those two are always, I have two different chapters. It's when you first land as a visiting grad student, I was covered by the University of Washington for healthcare, so that was easy. But when you get into the workforce, you got to select your plans and you got to select what is a 401k. And I had, thank you for this generous colleague of mine, Chris Yoon at the time, that spent a few minutes with me to explain both sides of the story, to be like, no, you got to invest in a 401k right away. This is your retirement plan. And I was like, what but how? Like, I don't know anything about the markets. This is not something they teach us in France. And he gave me a strategy, like a mix, right? Investment mix, if I can call it that, like 30% on or 50% on this and blah, blah, blah. And to be honest, I used it the same for 10 years. I never changed it until I left PwC. And I was like, oh, maybe it's time for me to go learn whether I should change those weights on my investment. And then the healthcare is just 20 years later. I still don't get it. How this thing is, why
I
is it
still don't get it either.
why are people going bankrupt just to have basic care? And I think, and again, people might say, well, you're coming from your French perspective and it's all free. It's not free, just to be clear. We pay a lot of taxes for it. And now the system's broken because people have abused the system. And when the care is going down, the level of care is going down, but you won't go bankrupt. That's actually a good thing. And so that's one of the things that I scratch my head even now, just being like, hey, why can't everybody has just a basic amount of care? And I think I'm comparing to, do you have a pet, Andy?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have pet insurance?
We just got it recently, especially as he ages.
Right. I compare and I ask, why can't we just have the same simple pet insurance where you pay a premium, it's $80 a month or whatever, and then 80% is covered, 20% is not covered. It's very simple. Yes, they try to squeeze some pre-existing condition, but not really. There's a waiting period. I get it. But
yeah,
like, it's very simple. You submit your claim. They say yes, no. If it's a yes, 80% done, move on. And I'm like, why can't we just do the same here? Why does it have to be all those codes and authorization?
Oh my gosh.
And
it's so ridiculous.
Condition. Some people were born with those pre-existing conditions. They didn't choose those pre-existing conditions. So it's, I don't get it. So these are the two things that I'm still, investment, I figured it out eventually. Healthcare, not so much.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I saw that you are really into movies. What's your favorite movie in the last 3 years?
That's a hard one, to be honest.
I opened up the window to 3 years and not 1 year.
I know. It's interesting because I do consume a lot of audiovisual content for sure. Obviously, we've all caught up with the binge watching called Netflix and other streaming services. So it's a lot of TV shows. I have to admit, I've been following more than movies the last 3 years.
You can do TV shows as well.
It depends what you like. And there is mindless watching, and then there is deep thinking. This is a good question, actually. I should tell you. If you would ask me what's my favorite movie of all time, I know which one I can answer. The last 3 years has been more difficult. I might have to pass on that one. I don't think I have a favorite one. I know it sounds crazy.
How about your favorite of all time?
Some Like It Hot.
Oh, okay.
That's an old one.
I don't think I've seen it.
Yeah, an old one with Marilyn Monroe and Tony Curtis.
Nice.
And that's one I grew up with. I watched it, I don't know how many times at my grandma's.
Yeah.
And it's I guess people would call it maybe a chick flick now with our standards, but that's one of her breakout roles and all that. So really loved it. But no, I'll give you one. I think Oppenheimer was very well done, to be honest.
Really good.
Last year, 2 years ago, my God, I'm losing track of time. Oppenheimer was really well done on a difficult topic, to be frank. But I also enjoyed Barbie, believe it or not. That was a fun, it was like the contracts of that summer of like, how do we go from such a topic to the role that some of us grew up with, by the way.
It was crazy. Those were good movies for sure.
Yeah.
My last question is, what are you optimistic about?
What am I optimistic about? I think it's a difficult time across the world, to be honest. And I think there's a lot of changes coming. It's been 100 years for certain events, and I think we're due for some changes. I just hope that we've learned from all of those. And I think we have an interesting generations now behind us, right? Let's see what they do with what they're given. But you know what? I think everybody when internet came out, everybody was like, oh my God. And so much good thing came out of it, the internet, when you think about it. But it was also a bit scary, right? Now we're all connected. And then social media came, and now was like, oh my God. It's still good and bad stuff on social media. I'm glad I didn't grow up with it, but that's just me. I think AI is the new thing. I think a lot of people are on the fence, right? There is like really good stuff that can come out of it. And there's really also bad stuff that can come out of it. And I sure hope that after the bubble burst or the dust settles, if it ever settles, right, that we are actually going to use that for the greater good in some areas, especially when you think about healthcare and medicine and science advancement and all that to get us out of this. I hope it helps us take a leap in some of the technological advances. So then we are better with climate, we're better with medicine, we're better, and just make sure that we can feed and help more people than what we've done. And again, I'm a bit idealistic. I think it's people say my Aquarius side. So here you go. But not that I believe in that. But yeah, I hope it's going to help us just make the lives of a lot of people better. And despite the scariness, the things we got to figure it out, privacy and all that. But I think it's great. It's great to be part of it, to be honest, to see it. I'd like to be the one I would love to say our generation will be people being sent to space and discover other worlds. I don't think we will, but you never know. But AI is our tech breakthrough that could potentially change a lot of things in the future. And I'm excited about that, to be honest, more than I'm scared. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Elisabeth. If people want to reach out to you, learn more about Boxsy, work with you, where do you want to send them to?
Yeah, LinkedIn is great. I'm usually pretty responsive, so please don't hesitate. Always like to connect with founders and people build a network and help. So if you need anything, especially in your early stage journey from an operations, fundraising, you name it, please feel free to reach out.
Amazing. Thank you for being on Forum Founders.
Hey, thanks for having me, Andy.